The afternoon sun settled over the quiet suburban neighborhood, warm and peaceful in a way that made everything seem harmless. The lawns were trimmed, the sidewalks were clean, and the houses stood in neat rows like they had been arranged by careful hands. It was the kind of place where people smiled a little too long, watched a little too closely, and whispered just a little too softly when someone new arrived. That afternoon, a black SUV eased into the driveway of a house that had been empty for months. The engine shut off, and the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Curtains moved, windows darkened behind silhouettes, eyes watched, the driver's door opened, and a tall, well-built black man stepped out. His name was Darian Holt. His posture was calm, steady, the quiet strength of someone who had been through storms, far greater than anything this neighborhood had to offer. He didn't wear flashy clothes, just a simple dark shirt, fitted jeans, and clean boots. There was nothing loud about him, nothing dramatic, but the air around him carried weight, the kind that demanded respect without ever needing to say a word. Darian walked to the back of the SUV and opened the trunk. Inside were neatly packed boxes, folded clothing, and a few personal items wrapped with care. This wasn't someone running from chaos. This was someone who had earned his peace and intended to keep it. Across the street, Pamela, the neighborhood's unofficial watcher, narrowed her eyes from behind her lace curtains. Blonde hair pinned too tightly, lipstick applied a shade too bright, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the type who memorized mailbox numbers, HOA rules, and every face that had ever passed through the neighborhood. And she had never seen Darian before. She didn't like that. She didn't like it one bit. She stepped outside, her steps sharp and pointed, like she was marching toward a confrontation she had already decided she would win. She didn't bother to introduce herself or soften her tone. She went straight in, like accusation was her native language. "Excuse me," she said, arms crossed, brows raised. "Can I ask what exactly you're doing here?" Darian didn't react with irritation or surprise. He simply lifted a box from the trunk and spoke evenly. "Moving in." Pamela seemed offended by the simplicity of the answer. This house was listed as vacant. It shouldn't be occupied yet. "Where did you get the keys?" Darian placed the box down on the driveway. He didn't rush. He didn't defend himself. He didn't flare up like she expected. He just looked at her, calm and steady. "I bought the house. The sale closed 3 weeks ago." The calm in his voice didn't satisfy her. It bothered her. People like Pamela thrived on conflict, and when someone refused to feed it, they pushed harder. "I'll need to see proof," she said, folding her arms even tighter. "This neighborhood has rules." Darian raised a brow slightly, not in surprise, but in disappointment. "Ma'am, I don't need your permission to live in my house." For the first time, her voice cracked. She didn't like being told no. She didn't like being corrected. And she certainly didn't like that she couldn't intimidate him. Her eyes hardened. "I'm calling the HOA and the police." She spun on her heel and stormed back toward her home, already dialing her phone. Darian didn't chase after her, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just went back to what he was doing. He had done nothing wrong. He didn't need to justify his presence. But the neighborhood was watching now, from porches, windows, driveways. Conversations started, speculations formed, and the quiet street that once felt peaceful now hummed with suspicion. And then, from a house 2 doors down, a teenager named Eli watched through his bedroom window. His camera was already recording, not because he expected something to happen, but because he recognized the look in Pamela's eyes. He had seen it before. This wasn't about house rules. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about who society thinks belongs, and who it thinks shouldn't. Darian carried his last box inside, shut the trunk, and locked the door. For a moment, silence returned. The breeze carried the soft rustle of leaves. A dog barked down the street. Life seemed to settle, but the sirens broke the quiet before peace could take hold. 2 police cars rolled onto the street, lights flashing, even though there was no emergency, just the assumption of one. Neighbors stepped out. Phones came out. Eli pressed record again. Darian stepped outside slowly, not out of fear, but because he had learned to move carefully in situations like this. His hands stayed visible. His posture remained open. His presence remained grounded. The officers approached, and Pamela watched from her porch, arms crossed, jaw lifted slightly, convinced she had been right all along. "This is just like last time," she whispered to herself. But this time, she didn't know who she was dealing with. This time, the story wouldn't play out the way she thought. Because Darian Holt's past was not ordinary. And he didn't come to this neighborhood to be controlled. He came here to live. And if they wanted to make that difficult, they were about to find out who they were pushing. The 2 police officers stepped out of their cruisers as the neighborhood watched from driveways, porches, and windows that pretended not to be open but clearly were. The red and blue lights reflected across the quiet suburban street, washing over the houses like a warning, even though nothing dangerous was happening. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm that had already been set in motion long before it arrived. Darian stood on his driveway, hands relaxed and visible, posture controlled. Not defensive, not afraid, just steady. The kind of steady that came from years of training and discipline. The kind most people would never notice unless they had lived through the same storms. The first officer, a tall man with a shaved head and a jaw clenched tight from choosing reaction before thought, walked forward with authority that felt more practiced than earned. "Sir," he said, voice sharp, "we got a report of someone trespassing on this property. We're going to need you to step away from the house." Darian didn't move back. Instead, he took a slow breath, the kind taken by someone who understood how things could go wrong very quickly if the wrong words were spoken. "I live here," he replied calmly. "This is my home." The officer looked unconvinced, or maybe he just didn't want to be convinced. "Neighbors say the house was listed unoccupied." Darian met his gaze, unshaken. "I closed on the property 3 weeks ago. You can check your system." The second officer, a younger one with uncertain eyes, looked like he didn't want to be here. His posture wasn't as aggressive. His hand didn't hover near his weapon. He watched Darian closely, not because he saw a threat, but because he saw something else. Something familiar. He noticed the way Darian held himself, balanced, alert, contained, like a trained professional. The first officer didn't notice any of that. He was too focused on proving control. "In ID," he snapped. Darian nodded once. Not submissive, just controlled. He reached slowly into his wallet and handed over his ID. No sudden movements, no gestures that could be misread. This wasn't the first time he had to think before doing something as simple as reaching for identification. The officer took the card, looked at it, and then looked back at Darian. His eyes flickered, surprise, confusion, maybe even disbelief. But he didn't show the card to his partner. He slid it into his vest as if the truth didn't matter. "We're going to need to verify this with dispatch. Until then, step away from the property. And that was when Pamela stepped forward from her porch, voice sharpened with certainty she hadn't earned. "I told you," she called out loudly. "He doesn't belong here. We have rules in this neighborhood, standards." Her voice carried, not just through the street, but through the unspoken system she relied on. The system where accusation was enough. The system where who said something mattered more than what was true. Darian didn't turn to her. He didn't even give her the acknowledgement she wanted. He just looked at the officer calmly. "Call dispatch," he said. "They'll confirm everything." The younger officer nodded and stepped back toward the cruiser. She typed into the computer. His eyebrows lifted almost immediately. "It's registered," he said quietly. "The property is under his name. Records confirmed." The first officer's shoulders stiffened. His jaw locked. The truth was undeniable. But admitting it meant letting go of control. Pamela stared, stunned, refusing to accept what she heard. "That can't be right," she snapped. "There must be a mistake. The realtor didn't notify us. The HOA didn't approve him." And that was when Darian finally turned to look at her. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't startled. It wasn't emotional at all. It was the look of someone who had seen far worse than suburban hostility and refused to let it shape him. "Pamela," he said evenly, "I don't need your approval to exist here. I bought this home. I'm staying." Her face twisted, not from his words, but from the fact that he did not fear her. The first officer reluctantly handed the ID back. "You should notify the HOA next time," he muttered, still trying to hold on to authority. Darian didn't argue. He simply stated, "I already did." The officer paused. Pamela froze, because that meant the HOA had known, the board had known, and she had not. And suddenly this had nothing to do with trespassing. This was about control. The younger officer cleared his throat, politely stepping in. "Sir, everything checks out. We apologize for the misunderstanding." Darian gave a short nod. "Understood." But the moment should have ended there. Except Pamela stepped forward again. "You people think you can just walk into places like this and—" Her words cut off when she realized how loud she had spoken. The street went silent. Everyone watching heard it. Even she heard herself. Even the officers looked at her. And for a moment, even they recoiled. Darian didn't raise his voice. He didn't respond in anger. He simply looked at her. The same calm stare as before. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "But you're going to learn something today. I don't run. I don't hide. And I don't break space." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. Then Darian turned and walked inside his own home, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. The neighborhood didn't know it yet, but the story of Darian Holt had only just begun. The following morning came quietly, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. The sun rose over the rows of identical rooftops, spreading a warm golden light across trimmed lawns, polished cars, and white picket fences. But the calm surface could not hide the tension that had settled in overnight. People were watching. People were talking. Inside his kitchen, Darian poured himself a cup of coffee. He moved with a slow, steady rhythm, like someone who had learned the importance of controlling his breath and his reactions. His home was still unfamiliar. Boxes still unopened, furniture not yet placed, walls still empty. But he stood in that space like he belonged there. Because he did. Outside, the neighborhood stirred awake. Lawn sprinklers clicked, dogs barked, car engines turned over, and behind curtains, eyes watched his front door. He could feel the attention without needing to look. He was used to that. Later that morning, he stepped outside to take the trash to the curb. A few houses away, A group of neighbors stood in a loose circle near the mailbox. Their murmurs stopped the moment he walked outside, like someone had pressed pause on their conversation. No greetings, no nods, just silence that stretched a little too long. Darian didn't react. He placed the trash bin neatly by the curb and began walking back up the driveway. But one neighbor, an older man in a faded baseball cap, broke away from the group and approached him. His steps were slow, cautious, unsure. His eyes weren't hostile, more curious, maybe even respectful. He stopped a few feet away. The older man spoke in a steady, even voice. He said he wanted to introduce himself. He said his name was Howard. He said he had lived in the neighborhood for 17 years. Darian listened quietly. He nodded to show he heard him. Howard then lowered his voice. He explained that not everyone in the neighborhood acted the way Pamela did. He explained that some people were uncomfortable with how she tried to control everything. He explained that what happened yesterday had spread fast, faster than anything else had in months. Darian nodded once again. He appreciated the honesty. He appreciated the attempt at fairness. Howard then said something that stayed with him. He said that when someone new comes into a place that is used to sameness, the ground shakes, even if the person causing the change is doing nothing wrong. Darian understood. He had lived that before, many times. Howard gave a polite nod and returned to the group. Their whispers started again, but quieter this time. Darian returned inside. Later that afternoon, a white SUV pulled into the driveway. It was sleek and new, with tinted windows and quiet tires that rolled across the concrete, like the vehicle didn't want to disturb the air around it. The driver door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, confident, professional. Hair pulled back smoothly, eyes sharp, aware of everything around her. This was Evelyn, Darian's sister. She walked to the door and knocked softly. Darian opened it without hesitation. There was no dramatic greeting between them, no emotional exchange, just presence. Two people who understood each other without needing many words. She stepped inside. The air shifted almost immediately. Her presence was strong, steady, unshakable, the kind of energy that did not demand respect, but simply held it. She walked through the living room, looking around briefly at the empty walls and unopened boxes. Then she looked at Darian again. She asked if everything was all right. Darian said that it was. Evelyn didn't look completely convinced, but she accepted the answer. She placed a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were documents. Nothing tense. Nothing dramatic. Just proof. Proof of ownership. Proof of identity. Proof of position. Proof of authority. She didn't say what to do with them. She didn't have to. They were there for when the time came. She always prepared for the time it might come. When the two of them stepped back outside, the neighborhood saw it. Evelyn standing tall. Darian steady beside her. Two people who carried themselves with a quiet power that could not be shaken. Pamela was watching from her porch. Her eyes narrowed. She walked toward them. Her footsteps were sharp, clipped, quick. She stopped at the edge of Darian's driveway, hands on her hips, ready to speak with that same tone she had used the day before. But before she could speak, Evelyn turned her head slowly and looked at her, directly and calmly. Not angry, not defensive, just aware. Pamela hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for the air to shift. She asked if Evelyn lived there. Evelyn answered simply. She said no. She said she was visiting. Her voice was level and firm, without raised tone or aggression. Pamela tried to regain her confidence. She mentioned HOA guidelines. She mentioned community rules. She mentioned approvals and procedures. Evelyn listened. Then she responded, calm as a still lake. She explained that property law outranked HOA preference. She explained that ownership did not require neighbor approval. She explained that no one here had the authority to challenge residency. And then she said one last line, slow, clear, unmistakable. She said that the problem was not misunderstanding. The problem was assumption. Pamela blinked. Her confidence shook. Her words fell apart before reaching her mouth. The conversation ended with silence, the heavy kind. Pamela stepped back. Her steps were slower than before. Darian and Evelyn returned inside. They did not celebrate. They did not speak loudly. They simply sat at the kitchen table, drinking the coffee, now cooled. No panic. No fear. No rush. Because this was not the end. This was only shift. The neighborhood would react again. And when it did, Darian would be ready. Because he had lived through storms far greater than this one. And storms were where he learned how to stand. The next morning began with a different kind of energy. The neighborhood felt tense, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. The usual rhythm of morning dog walks, sprinklers, and coffee cups clinking on porches continued. But conversations were shorter. Smiles were thinner. Doors closed a bit faster than usual. Darian stepped outside again, this time not to take out trash, but just to breathe the morning air. He stood tall, calm, grounded, the kind of calm that made people wonder what he knew that they didn't. Across the street, Pamela's house was busy. Curtains moved. Shadows passed by the front windows. Cars pulled up briefly, then left. People came and went through the side door instead of the front. It wasn't hard to guess what was happening. A private meeting. One she hadn't announced publicly. One she didn't want new residents to know about. By early afternoon, Darian watched as a group of familiar neighborhood faces walked up the driveway to Pamela's house. They weren't smiling. They weren't talking. They walked with purpose, heads down, like they were carrying something heavy that wasn't physical. Howard was among them. He glanced once toward Darian's house as he walked. Just once. Long enough to communicate everything without a word. There was going to be a vote. Not a fair one. Not an official one. But a vote held behind closed doors by people who believed that whispering made their decisions stronger. Inside Pamela's living room, voices rose and fell. Plans were being made. Rules were being twisted. Stories were being exaggerated. And the story they told was not the truth. They claimed Darian was confrontational. They claimed he was aggressive. They claimed he had disrespected the neighborhood. They claimed he did not belong. Not because of behavior, not because of anything he had done, but because some of them needed a reason to justify a feeling they were ashamed to admit they held. He said the neighborhood had changed long before Darian arrived. It was only now that they were forced to face it. The room was silent, loud. She placed the items on the table without a word and looked at him. Her eyes asked the question without speaking. He already knew what she meant. He nodded. She understood. They didn't talk about the meeting because they didn't need to. They didn't talk about fear because they had already lived through it many times. They didn't talk about strategy because they didn't need to strategize against something so small. Instead, they talked about paint colors for the living room. They talked about the best place to plant trees in the backyard. They talked about weather, weekend plans, and where to put the family photographs that still rested inside the box near the wall. Their peace was not fragile. It was earned. Hours passed. The neighborhood meeting ended. Car doors shut. People walked away in silence. Pamela stood alone on her porch, arms crossed tightly, jaw clenched. She had expected a victory. She had expected everyone to follow her. She had expected her authority to remain unquestioned. But the neighborhood wasn't as united behind her as she thought. Power that depends on fear is never real power. Darian eventually stepped out onto his porch. He didn't call out to her. He didn't look at her directly. He simply existed in his space with quiet confidence. And that was enough to unravel everything she tried to build. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. It was not loud, not sharp, just thin, strained, and tired. She said this neighborhood had always been a certain way. Darian finally spoke, calm and steady. He told her that neighborhoods are not defined by fences or rules, but by the people who live in them. He said that respect is not something that can be demanded. It is something that is given when earned. He said that belonging is not up for anyone else to approve. Pamela didn't respond. Not because she didn't have words, but because, for the first time, her words would have sounded small. She turned and walked back inside. This time, her steps were slow. Darian did not watch her go. He didn't need to. Evelyn stepped beside him on the porch. The evening light softened the sky. And for the first time since moving there, the neighborhood felt like home. Not because they were accepted, not because they were welcomed, but because they stood firm when someone tried to push them out. A home is not given. A home is claimed. And Darian had claimed his. The sun was just beginning to set when the situation in the neighborhood took another turn. The orange glow from the sky stretched across the houses, casting long shadows across lawns and sidewalks. People were arriving home from work. Kids were finishing up bike rides, and sprinklers hissed in the distance. Everything looked normal on the outside. But inside the community, tension was building quietly. Jordan had spent most of the afternoon thinking. He sat on the back porch swing, gently rocking as he processed everything that had happened so far. The arguments, the threats, the accusations, and now the strange warnings from the neighbors. He replayed each moment slowly, trying to understand who was behind everything and why. His wife Aaliyah walked outside, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed him one and took a seat beside him, her expression calm but concerned. "Your mind hasn't rested all day," she said softly. Jordan nodded. "It feels like there's a puzzle right in front of me, but some pieces are missing. Everyone seems nervous, but no one wants to say who's really pulling the strings." Aaliyah took a sip of her tea before responding. "People aren't afraid of HOA rules. They're afraid of whoever controls them." Jordan let out a deep exhale. Exactly. For a few moments, they just sat together. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Like they understood each other without needing too many words. But that peace didn't last long. A black SUV slowed to a stop in front of their driveway. The engine hummed softly as the windows rolled down. It was the same vehicle from earlier. The same tinted glass. The same silent presence. Jordan stood up slowly and stepped forward. This time, the window rolled down fully, and the face revealed inside wasn't one he expected. It was Charlotte Benson, the president of the HOA. Her smile was stiff, controlled, like someone trained to stay composed no matter what. "Well, Jordan," she said, voice smooth and calm. "I was hoping we could talk again. Just the two of us." Jordan didn't respond. He simply watched her, waiting for her to continue. Charlotte looked around as if making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "You've made quite an impression since moving in," she said. "People here are unsettled." Jordan crossed his arms. "People are unsettled because someone is trying to control them." She smiled again, this time more tense. "This community has a system, a structure, a way of functioning. When a new person comes in and challenges that system, things become complicated. Or maybe," Jordan replied, "the system is broken." Charlotte's eyes flickered, just for a second, a crack in her mask. "Look," she said, changing her tone, "I'm willing to make this easy. If you sign a voluntary agreement to follow HOA leadership decisions without dispute, we can put this situation behind us. No fines, no warnings, no more conflict." Jordan felt the shift immediately. Her voice wasn't offering peace. It was delivering a threat covered in polite language. "And if I don't sign it?" he asked. Charlotte leaned closer. "Then things will become difficult. Fees, property complaints, board votes, legal action. We both know how these things go." Jordan stayed silent for a moment. Then he spoke. "You're used to people folding. You're used to people being afraid of pressure. That's how you've kept control here for so long." Charlotte's smile faded completely. Jordan stepped closer to the SUV window, his voice calm and steady. "I've dealt with harder people than you. People with real power. If you think a stack of HOA forms is going to scare me, then you don't know me at all." Charlotte's jaw clenched. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Without another word, she rolled up the window. The black SUV pulled away slowly, gliding down the street like a shadow retreating. Aaliyah walked up beside Jordan. "You didn't sign it," she said. Jordan shook his head. "I never will." Later that evening, Jordan received a message from his neighbor, Mr. Lopez, a quiet man who usually kept to himself. "Meet me in my garage. Come alone." Jordan hesitated. But something told him this was important. He walked across the street. The garage door opened slowly, revealing Mr. Lopez standing beside a large metal filing cabinet. His hands were trembling slightly. "I've lived here for 9 years, he said quietly. 9 years, Jordan, and I've seen how she operates." He pulled open the drawer and handed Jordan a thick folder. Inside were copies of complaints, disputes, fines, pages and pages of records. But what stood out most were signatures, or more accurately, forgeries. "She forged signatures to push through HOA votes," Mr. Lopez said. "She intimidated families. She threatened legal action to silence people. And the worst part? She uses the HOA funds to benefit her own business contacts." Jordan felt his heart beat slow. Everything finally made sense. "This is what she's afraid of," Jordan said quietly. "This is the power she's been protecting." Mr. Lopez nodded, but people were afraid to speak up until now. Jordan closed the folder. "No one stands alone anymore," he said. And for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, Jordan felt something shift. Not anger, not fear, but unity. The kind that changes everything. The next morning came quietly, but the neighborhood did not feel the same. There was a different kind of awareness in the air, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Birds still sang, sprinklers still whispered across lawns, and children still waited for the school bus. Yet eyes watched from behind curtains. Doors opened halfway, not fully. People were alert now, and they were waiting for Jordan. News traveled fast in a community like this. By sunrise, several neighbors already knew that Jordan had refused to sign Charlotte's power agreement. Some admired it. Some feared what would come next. But almost everyone was curious. Jordan stepped out of his house with the same calm posture he always carried. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. He walked with purpose, as if today was just another day. Aaliyah watched him from the doorway. Her eyes filled with steady trust. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew her support was unshakable. Across the street, Mr. Lopez waited. He stood next to the sidewalk, holding a simple envelope. Nothing about it looked remarkable, but the weight of what was inside could change everything. Jordan approached him slowly. Mr. Lopez spoke quietly. People are afraid, Jordan. Not because they are weak, but because they have been controlled for too long. They forgot they have a voice. Jordan nodded. Fear only lives when silence lives. Once someone speaks, others remember they can speak too. Mr. Lopez took a deep breath and smiled, small but real. Then today we speak. Together they walked toward the community center. The community center looked different now. It had always been clean, organized and welcoming. But today, it felt like a stage waiting for the main scene of a story. Cars lined the parking lot. People gathered in small groups. Some whispered. Some stood with crossed arms. Some looked nervous. And at the center of it all, Charlotte stood on the steps. Her blazer perfect, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp and focused. She saw Jordan and Mr. Lopez walking toward her and immediately forced a calm smile. But it was the kind of smile that breaks at the edges. One that only exists to hide something else underneath. "Good morning," she said, as if they were meeting for casual conversation. "I hope you're here to settle things peacefully." Jordan didn't speak yet. He simply held her gaze. Charlotte continued speaking, her voice controlled. "We don't want conflict here. The community needs stability, and stability comes from leadership, consistent leadership. My leadership." Jordan slowly raised the envelope from Mr. Lopez. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just calmly. "This community has leadership," he said. "But leadership is not the same as control. Leadership earns respect. Control demands silence." Charlotte's expression tightened. Jordan opened the envelope and pulled out the copies of forged signatures. Several neighbors leaned forward without meaning to. He spoke clearly, every word steady, every word meant to be heard. "These aren't just papers. They are proof of how votes were manipulated. Proof of how decisions were made without the community's voice. Proof that people were threatened into agreeing. Proof that you have been running this place through fear, not fairness." A ripple moved through the crowd. Charlotte's face changed. It didn't break completely, but the cracks were visible. She tried to speak, but Jordan continued before she could. "You told me the community needs structure. That's true. But structure means trust. Structure means transparency. Structure means fairness. And none of that can exist while you are the one in control." Charlotte lifted her chin, regaining sharpness. "You have no legal standing to challenge the HOA board." Jordan didn't argue. Instead, he gestured to Mr. Lopez. Mr. Lopez stepped forward and spoke. Not loudly, but firmly enough to carry. "I do." People turned their eyes to him, some in surprise, some in understanding. "For 9 years," he said, "I stayed quiet. I thought someone else would speak. I waited for someone strong enough to challenge what was happening. But strength doesn't appear. Strength is chosen. And today, I choose. Other neighbors stepped forward too. One by one. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just choosing. A mother who had been fined unfairly. A father who had been threatened for speaking up. Two retirees who had been intimidated by legal letters. Even the quiet teenager from the corner house. They stood behind Jordan. The entire energy shifted. Charlotte saw it. Control was no longer in her hands. She tried one last time, voice sharp and desperate. You don't understand what you're doing. The HOA board. But Jordan spoke over her, not with aggression, but with truth. The board doesn't exist without the community, and the community has decided. Silence. A powerful silence. Not empty. Certain. Charlotte's voice finally cracked. A faint tremor. You think they will follow you? Jordan didn't look at her. He looked at the neighbors. And they nodded, not to him, to each other. Because the decision was no longer about one leader. It was about every single person deciding they would no longer live under someone else's fear. Jordan finally spoke his last words for the moment. Quietly, but in a way that everyone heard. No more fear here. Charlotte stepped back. And this time, she had no words left. The people did not cheer. They did not clap. They simply breathed. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt free. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, stretching warm light across the houses, sidewalks, and the same lawns that once felt like they were watched and controlled. Now the neighborhood felt different. Not suddenly fixed, not magically perfect, but lighter, freer, like everyone could finally take a full breath again. After the confrontation at the community center, people did not rush home. They stayed outside, lingering, in groups, speaking softly, sharing stories they had held in for too long. Some leaned on fences. Some sat on porch steps. Some simply stood in the open air because, for the first time, there was nothing to fear about being seen. Jordan walked home beside Aaliyah, who slipped her hand into his. It was not a dramatic gesture, just something honest, something full of quiet pride. She had watched him carry the truth when it was heavy. Now, she watched the weight starting to lift. You didn't just stand up for us, she said. You showed everyone how to stand up for themselves. Jordan smiled a little. Not a big smile, just enough. They were already ready. They just needed someone to start the first footstep. Aaliyah looked at him with the same steady trust she always had. You did that. They stepped onto their porch, where the evening light glowed warm across the wood. The house, which once felt surrounded by pressure and judgment, now felt like a place of peace again. But the day wasn't quite over. Footsteps sounded behind them. Jordan turned to see three neighbors approaching. Mr. Lopez, the mother from down the street, who always walked her son to school, and one of the retirees who always gardened early in the morning. Their faces were calm, but their eyes held something strong. Mr. Lopez spoke. We are forming a new board, a real one this time, fair, open, and we want you to be part of it. Jordan didn't answer right away. His eyes softened, but there was thought behind them. He looked at Aaliyah. She didn't tell him what to do. She simply nodded, letting him choose for himself. Jordan turned back to them. I'll help, but not as someone in charge, as someone guiding. The leadership will belong to the community, not one person. The neighbors shared looks. Relief, agreement, respect. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say, Mr. Lopez said. There was no applause, no celebration, just understanding. That was enough. A few days passed, and the neighborhood slowly settled into a new rhythm. Meetings were held openly in the community center, with the doors unlocked and the blinds open. People spoke without whispering. No one watched their tone. No one worried about being punished for asking questions. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Charlotte had not been seen since that day. Her house was quiet, shades drawn, car unmoved. Some people whispered. Some felt angry. Some felt sorry. But Jordan didn't speak against her. He didn't have to. The truth had already shown itself. Jordan returned to his routines. He trimmed the hedges. He repaired the front steps. He helped neighbors carry groceries. Not because he was trying to prove anything, but because that was who he had always been. One evening, as the sun dipped into orange, the same teen from earlier in the story rode his bike down the sidewalk and stopped in front of Jordan's yard. The boy hesitated, then said, "I told my mom about what you did. She said thank you." Jordan's expression softened. "I'm glad she feels safe now." The boy nodded, looking relieved. Then he rode away, wheels clicking softly. Sometimes the smallest reactions say the most. Later that night, Jordan and Aaliyah sat on the porch. The cicadas hummed in the distance. Porch lights flicked on one by one across the street. Everything felt ordinary again, and yet everything was new. Aaliyah leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's quiet." Jordan nodded. "Yeah, but this time it's the good kind of quiet." She looked up at him. "You did everything you could." Jordan took her hand again. "We did everything, all of us. Because this was never just one person's story. It was the story of a community remembering its voice. The truth is, strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in calm words. Sometimes it stands steady in silence. Sometimes it simply refuses to back down when something is wrong. And sometimes strength is the first person to say, "No more fear here." And others follow, not because of force, but because of courage. And because of honesty. That is how communities are rebuilt. Not by rules, not by power, but by choosing each other. Alright, thank you for watching this story. If it spoke to you, or if you've ever seen someone stand up for what's right, then you already understand the strength in this moment. Make sure to like this video, share it with someone who might need it today, and subscribe for more stories just like this. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this neighborhood? Your voice matters here. I'll see you in the next one.